Hi, friends. It's Heidi M. And I'm joined by Dixon. Dixon, you are a well-known designer in film and television. It's so lovely to be here with you.
The pleasure is completely all mine. It's great.
A lot of us know your work in terms of being fans of a lot of filmmakers in Canada and elsewhere, and some television series. But for folks who might not be familiar with the work that you do, you've been in the industry for a number of years. But what is it that you do these days? You do a lot of different things.
Well, I like to keep it varied because then, keeps you on your toes. I've done, I guess probably the latest projects I've done are David Cronenberg's new film that's going to be coming out in April called Shrouds.
Mhm.
Then previously before that, I did Viggo Mortensen's film The Dead Don't Hurt, which was a big epic Western that we shot. In Mexico and all over.
Yes.
And I just actually physically just finished on Friday a new musical, Christmas musical for Disney with the Jonas Brothers.
Oh, that's fun.
So very different genres. Like I said, it keeps you on your toes from a Christmas musical to a big period piece to not a sci-fi, but something a little bit in the future that was David's film.
For sure. I'm familiar with the two films because of TIFF and being around the film festival circuit here in Toronto. But from my understanding is that you've always sort of been intrigued by fashion. In one of your interviews, you talk about making clothes for your dolls and then your sister. What is it about fashion and creating sort of looks that sort of attracts you and kind of keeps you going?
Well, I think what's interesting is that there's fashion that's in the streets, there's fashion that's in the magazine and on the catwalk, and then it's using those vibrant looks and those vibrant images that you see on those platforms, and then trying to translate it into film, depending on what the story is, and it could be from um, uh, uh, gosh, it could be from whatever characters they are, and then you kind of fuel yourself and you go with what you've seen and what's been around, and you use bits and elements of all that, and then you create your own look and your own character based on those.
For sure. And you've worked in different formats, not just film and television. I know that before that you've also done some dance and opera. And how do you tend to adapt depending on the project?
I think it's well, the thing with costume designers, the difference between costume designers and stylists,
Mhm.
or even fashion designers, is that we, as costume designers, you work from a script. So
Right.
it's all depends on what's on the page. And then it's the director and whatever their initial vision or concept of the whole thing is. And from there, then you research galore, whatever the environments are, and then you interpret it. And then you start doing some sketches and some ideas, and you throw those around, and depending of who's acting in it. And then also if it's, for instance, like a dance piece or a skating piece, and
Mhm.
then what's the technical things that need to happen,
Right.
and that will inform you as to what you can do and what you can't do. And the same as if, for instance, if it's a film or a series that has a lot of stunts, then you have to think of, okay, you have to hide the padding, you've got to,
Mhm.
there if it's blood, well, you can't have, let's say, a red top because then the blood won't show. So there's all these different things, elements that you kind of put in a row, and then it helps and guides you in your design to kind of make it more efficient and moving the story around.
Right. So before I have questions about some films, but before maybe we get into the nitty-gritty, have you also been in different roles as you kind of grown into your career? Because I know you do illustrations as well, and people may not always know that people who are costume designers have actually been in different roles in the industry.
I think when I started, a few decades ago, I started off as a seamstress, and I started off in theater, which for me was an excellent background because you really got a good foundation, and the pace isn't as fast as film and television, but you do things properly and you really learn the craft.
Right.
So I was lucky in that, and I did a little bit of cutting, I did a little bit of dyeing, I did some millinery, dabbled at a lot of this, and then I started, into my path into designing, and so now I have perhaps a slight understanding of what all of the elements are in making something. And so I can hopefully guide my team and getting to where we all want to go in the end.
Right. So we were at the CAFCAT panel on the weekend, and for folks who don't know, it's an organization where a lot of costume design and department folks kind of get together and they celebrate each other, which is great. But maybe the public doesn't know that some of these events are open to us. And it was great to hear, as an audience member and a fan of the craft, how community based the craft is, and sort of the relationships that have developed over time across the group. Can you talk a little bit about your experience, sort of being in the industry here in Canada, for example?
I think what's wonderful is that we're, like you said, we are a community because to either you make when you're making films, television, whether it be also on stage, whether it be theater or ballet or operas, it's a collaboration. It's a teamwork. It's not an individual career. It's definitely uh, all together. And also, we're kind of like a bunch of gypsies as well at the same time because we go from one gig to another gig. There's nothing constant, and which is what is refreshing, and it keeps it intriguing and sometimes it's a bit difficult, but it's good, it's healthy. But because of that, you have, let's say, on each project, you meet between I don't know, 60 to 100 people. And sometimes you meet the same people, and other times you meet new ones. And that's what makes us such a huge community. And what's great about CAFCAD is that it really celebrates all the costume artisans across the country. And we get to see, because we have a tendency to work with the same people, but then we get to learn about other people and other ways as well that how people work in certain instances and so forth. So it's wonderful to be able to share our knowledge and to share together, which makes us stronger and more vibrant, as well as it's wonderful to, for instance, as the CAFCAT Awards, to celebrate together as well,
Right.
um, our artistry that we all have and we bring to the table.
Congratulations. I know that you won for the Dead Don't Hurt for period film and television. So maybe that's a good segue in terms of working with filmmakers. So you've worked with the likes of David Cronenberg and actors who have turned directors like Viggo Mortensen for the Dead Don't Hurt, and others that I will reserve to list on my website so people can read the myriad of folks you worked with. So when you're working on a period piece like The Dead Don't Hurt, like you said, it's a Western, it's very lush, there's probably a lot of research and a lot of references that you can kind of look towards for your work. How is that different from something like The Shrouds, which is, Cronenberg's latest film, like you said, is a little futuristic and maybe you get a little bit more freedom?
Um, Depends.
Depends.
I think to start first with Vigo's, he's the most incredible collaborator you could ever wish for. He is an artist himself, not only as an actor, but he writes. He speaks, I think it's 6 languages fluently. He
Yes.
writes poetry, I think, in 4 of them. He
Mm-hmm.
composes music. He's a photographer as well. So to work with him is truly a gift. With the Dead Don't Hurt, we started, of course, with the script that he sent us, and
Right.
then and a long time collaborator Carol Spears, who's a production designer. So we started anyways and did tons of research, and then we would go back and forth, with Vigo, and Vigo would send us some films or some things like, I like this, I don't like that. What do you think? And because it's an small independent film, it took a while to get all the financing. So
Mhm.
it was pushed and pushed and pushed, and that it enabled us to really research like crazy. And then I always love to do these massive boards. So all the different worlds that we're in, because
Mhm.
um, visuals, when we're in visuals anyways, and it's much easier to communicate with visual, because if I say green, my green could be very different to your green. But if
Mhm.
I have something that's green, then we can say, ah, that green.
Right.
And the same with these, and with the Dent Don't Hurt, it was a myriad of periods and different establishments and so forth. So we had the 1830s, we had Coureurs de Bois, we had the pioneers, we had the British soldiers, we even
Yes.
had a knight in shining armor. Then we jumped 30 years later, 1860s, in San Francisco, and there we have the seaport. We have all the sailors, the stevedores, we have bakers, we have the Chinatown, we have the merchants, and then we also had the upper class, and we had the art galleries, the art salons. We actually got cut out of the film. We had all of these huge theater scenes,
Mm.
and the bourgeoisie and so forth, and the big kind of Civil War gowns type.
Oh, yes.
Then we go into Nevada desert, and there you have the more typical Western, and where you have the cowboys, you have the ladies of the nights, you have the saloons, you have the pioneers that are very different there. You had miners, we had Mexicans, we had the Civil War soldiers. So all of these worlds, I will research to death. And what it is that also so that you can really, it becomes a language that is very current to you visually, so that of course the bodies are very different in 20th century than they were then.
Yes.
So you have to understand proportions and silhouettes. So by doing the research, you really get to understand what is important. So then when you do have your fittings and when you make choices, you can kind of hit the mark and get the feel of it without by having all of these visuals. And also, what's great about the visuals is that whenever an actor comes, I love it because you're usually the first one. They've read the script, but they don't really know all the bits and pieces of the film.
Right.
So when they usually come to the fitting, and I have like the walls are all plastered, so right away they come into the environment of what the film's going to be, and then they can start slowly putting themselves into it as we slowly kind of in the fitting start sculpting their characters by putting all of the costumes and doing
Mhm.
the fitting, and then all of a sudden there's a transformation
Right.
that kind of shows what the boards are, and then it's quite magical. So.
Right. I'm gonna stay on this with the actors. How how nice is it to have them be involved and maybe give you some feedback, or are there situations where actors sort of may not be as involved?
I always love it if they are completely involved,
Mhm.
because they're the ones that have to embody the character. They're the ones that have to sell the character.
Right.
And if they don't feel right in what they're wearing, it's kind of like anyone who has a pair of shoes that's too tight. Like you always think about it. It doesn't matter what you're doing. It's like
Yeah.
my shoes is just like, oh my
Bother
God.
me.
So it's just kind of the same. And then mostly with film, because the camera comes so close, and if
Mhm.
behind their eye, if they're not comfortable, you can read it.
Right.
So they can give you that extra thing, and then, really grab you into them, into the character. So I love it because it's a dialogue. Again, collaboration, right?
Yes, yes.
Um, and they have some ideas of what their character is as well, of course, and then we have some ideas as well, and we come to a consensus, and we work within it. And
Mhm.
some actors like to have a bit more say in it, and some are a bit more, okay, give me the palette and I'll work within the palette.
Right.
Um, it varies, you know what I
It
mean? You just
varies.
have to read it and
For sure. And we were going to talk about what's the difference in a film that might be set not so much in a period, as a period piece, but perhaps more contemporary or future like.
right. I think in contemporary, there's, it's in some ways for me, it's easier to do period because they're usually not as aware of the time frame. In contemporary, there's often more opinions
Sure.
because everyone wears clothes,
Mhm.
but one forgets that in the film it's not clothes, but it's a costume because you're not playing yourself, you're playing a character.
Yes.
Um, so it varies. I mean, for instance, on the Shrouds, we had a collaboration with Yves Saint Laurent, and they were one of the main producers and financiers of the film.
Mhm.
And we were able to actually, I was able to actually to go to Paris to YSL and work with their team there and went through their collection. And they, I think they wanted to perhaps have more in the film, but it's about characters, and this
Yes.
one was such a personal film of David's,
Mhm.
that he really knew who these people were that he had written.
Right.
And they're not fashion plates. I mean, one's a dog groomer. And so I worked closely with, for instance, with Vincent Cassel, who's
Mhm.
the character of Karsh. And for instance, it's like they had a collection, they had a wonderful trench coat that I loved. And I said, okay, can we take the lapels off? Can we make it a bit longer, but not black? Because,
Yes.
everything was black. So chose some fabrics and they made it, and then so we worked collaboratively like that. And
Mhm.
the quality was phenomenal. And then for the other characters, because they were more gritty and a bit more, the realism of it.
Yes.
So we worked on that. But again, the whole palette of that film is all in cool colors
Mhm.
to keep a little bit of that distance. And then the warmth only comes in certain beats where we pumped up the colors as well, and to get a little bit more grit there. But it was fascinating. And then, of course, to have the challenge and the wonderful experience of actually designing the shroud itself
Mhm.
was absolutely phenomenal. So that was fabulous.
Absolutely. I got a sneak peek because I went to see it at TIFF, but I can't wait to
Yeah,
see what other people,
yeah,
when other people get to
yeah,
see it later in
yeah.
the spring. So you do have a relationship with Carol Spears, who's been in the industry for a long time. What's that dialogue between you and her? Because you kind of, and I guess, you work with Vigo as well in both his films, kind of knowing people in that are going to be part of the project, and do you have a shorthand at some point because you've developed that relationship?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's extremely helpful when you have worked in the past with a production designer because there's a symbiotic, again, when I said like the color green,
Mm,
we usually know what tendencies of greens we will talk about and so forth. And
right.
there's a sensitivity to certain things that we both have. And I think because also if we do our work properly, you don't think about it. You just think about the story. You just
Mm-hmm.
know it works, and that's the best compliment. It's not as like, oh my God, did you see that chair in that set, or did you see that the hat on that costume? That should never happen. It should always be more in the background. We're simply like a palette, a painting of a palette that
Mm-hmm.
just envelops the story to give you the story, to bring you into the story. And
Mm-hmm.
hopefully, with our crafts, we can guide the audience a little bit visually to
Mhm.
what we want. So by having worked with Carol now on a number of projects together, she's a dream to work with, and we have a really great relationship, which is fabulous.
I'm wondering if you have any sort of behind the scenes stories about a project. It could be television or film that sort of has always been a bit of a highlight in your work career.
Um,
Maybe not a fair question.
um, one that I would that came as a surprise, I would say probably is Anne with an E. In
Mm-hmm.
that when my agent said, would you like, they want you to interview, and I said, oh my God, really? They're doing another Anne of Green Gable? Are you kidding me? It's just like that horse has been whipped so many times. And so I was kind of going reluctantly at the beginning, but then when I met Moira and then Nikki Caro, who was the director of the first two episodes, um, I just went, oh my God, I really want to do this. And thankfully I did get it, because they had an approach to it that was so realistic and
Mm-hmm.
gritty and more up to not as syrupy Disney as
Yes.
the other ones would be. And then I think also because being redhead myself and being Anne with an E and being a bit of a tomboy when I was younger, it really, of course, I read, devoured the books, and it really resonated with me. And then also just to have that collaboration with Maura was absolutely brilliant because we really connected and it just fueled the whole process. So that was a really exciting project, I think,
Mm-hmm.
for me. And then also because I really wanted Anne with an E to be um, realistic to PEI, to give
Right.
it justice to Canada, not to be just this, 1890s period piece. I
Mm-hmm.
wanted it to be, because if you think of it, like if you go back to the fashion you were talking about earlier
Right.
on, if we had fashion now in PEI and the fashion on in New York or in Paris, it's very different.
Very different for sure.
And the same with period. Even though we do the research, it's usually research of the bigger capitals that comes
Right.
up. So it
Mm-hmm.
was really important to me to get that taste, that flavor of more rural at that time. The same as the color palette. I based it on wildflowers of Prince Edward Island.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was just these wonderful challenges that came about that I was really intrigued and loved to do. You know what I mean?
It's such a nice series.
Oh,
I
thank
really
you.
liked it. I really liked it. And I think it's still available if people have not had a chance to see it. So that's a shout out for one of our Canadian dear ones. So and you've actually worked in a lot of film and television that have had a lasting impact, I think, in the industry, just like the one we've talked about. And with an E, do you ever sort of look back to your designs for past projects and kind of review them and kind of think how do they make you feel if you do that by looking them at them later in now.
Um, I try to look forward more than backwards.
Hmm.
Um, but there are times when you do a little bit, but um, I guess you still criticize your eye and kind of go, oh, I could have done better on this, or
Sure.
I would have done
Hmm.
this, but um, or then again, it's like what was successful about it, and what made it interesting, and
Right.
to remember those beats that are very successful, and then to bring those along on your next projects.
Hmm.
It's for instance, like with Anne with an E, with Marilla, they all had cummerbunds in those times, which is a women's
Yes.
belt. And I thought, well, she's a farmer. She wouldn't have a nice cloth one. And
Mm.
so I thought, what can I come up with? And then I thought, well, we'll do like a leather one, like a big leather belt, a man's belt. And I thought, no. And then that's when I designed, anyways, that leather cummerbund, which is the
Right.
first at first. And it's based from my head, not from any books. And it was so successful, and it meant it really could have been because it's utilitarian,
Exactly.
and the same as, let's say, with The Dead Don't Hurt with Vivian, and I thought, okay, she's going to have one belt, and
Yes.
it wasn't a cummerbund, but it was a belt, and just a utilitarian tiny little pouch on the side, and that was her only thing that she wore, whether it was um, um, her day dress or whether it was her evening dress. That was
Right.
the one belt.
Hmm.
Um,
I like that character as well of Vivian by Vicky Krieps because she's also very her clothes just fit her so well that it just looked like she'd been in them forever. And that's
yeah,
when you know you're really lost in the world, like you said, in
good.
films, right? Where you're just, oh, you notice them later, obviously, for someone like me who might write about the film, but
Right.
it just seemed like crisp, but at the same time, so part of her daily life, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And what was one of the threads that we tried to weave in that one is, first of all, because there's a lot of flashbacks as well, and
Yes. Hmm.
but it was because her father was very present in her imagination and so forth. And being a coureur de bois, he had a ceinture fléchée, which is the traditional woven belts that originally was from the First Nations, and then the French Canadians took it up, and so I had a traditional weaver weave them for us, and then we Vigo wanted a bit more red in it just to get the beat of the heart of the film. So we
Mm.
did that, and then that the belt kind of, you can see it through the films. It's like one of those "Where's Aldo?" and it kind of you can follow it. But
Yes.
also when you see young Vivian, so we put her in like a terracotta kind of reds.
Hmm.
Again, she's the heart of it. And then 30 years later, when she's in San Francisco, she's in more kind of a deep salmon colors at
Right.
times. And
Hmm.
then when she gets to the Nevada, um, then it was a conscious choice of making her even in lighter colors in contrast to the very, very harsh environment that she was in, and with in kind of a bit more sun bleach. Um,
Right.
and then because of that whole male kind of bravura of the saloons and
Mm.
everything. And so there she was kind of in a more very light salmon pinks, and a bit more faded, and but the thread was her belt and
About.
also this woven belt. So but
Hmm.
it's very subtle, and what's great is that most people probably don't even realize it, but there's a cohesiveness visually that helps to kind of the story along, and that's where we come in as costume designers to
Hmm.
visually help, you know what I mean? And
It's
and
so
and that's the
true.
fun of it.
That is the fun of it, and it's sort of like the point I wanted to make is that there are sort of almost like Easter eggs, that people kind of look
Mhm.
for in
Yep.
films. That if you do kind of, that's why I say this all the time, repeat viewings, because
Yeah.
then you start picking up a little bit more of these Easter eggs, and
Yeah.
and picking up all these wonderful gifts that people like you leave us,
Yeah.
cinematographers, composers, and we pick up the motifs. I'm curious in terms of, as you were saying, you look forward, you're trying to kind of stay current, but at the same time being able to research back when you need to. What are some of the influences, or what are the things that you use to learn and keep current in your craft?
I think um, one of the things in the past few years that I've been doing more and more so is actually going to life drawing. And
Mm,
I try and do it when I'm not working, because when you're working, you're doing
yes, long day.
14, 16-hour days. But in between, I'll go at least once a week, and I just do charcoal drawings. And what helps me is to understand even more fully the body. And the
Right.
more I draw it, the more I understand it in proportions and anomalies, because models are all different sizes and
Exactly.
different shapes and so forth. And none of us are straight,
Mm-hmm.
body wise, and uh, uh, and that I find helps me incredibly, because when you first assess an actor, you can right away very quickly see where you can best enhance something or where you need to work at or how to get the silhouette that you want in the end
Mhm.
by really understanding three-dimensionally. Because I always say costume designing is sculpting. You're sculpting a costume, you're sculpting fabric around a body to
Right.
produce a character. So whether it be contemporary or whether it be period or dance or whichever, it's still the same, but you have to understand it, three-dimensionally. So I find drawing helps me an awful lot.
So it's something so basic, but that makes so much sense.
Mhm.
And I'm in the interest of time. I'm gonna say thank you. We could almost do a master class with you. So maybe that's
Well,
something for the next round. Again, congratulations on your CAFTA awards, and
thank you very
we'll see
much.
what else is next for you.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few things that are kind of brewing, but hopefully it's something, another very tasty project. But thank you very, very much. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, thank you so much. My pleasure.
Yeah. All right. Until the next time.
Till next time.